Good morning. It's April 3rd, 2023. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to interview and introduce Scott Fiore, president of TriStarr. As we all know, employment is such a critical necessity and challenge to those who get criminal records. Employers and agencies that can help people find jobs so they can support themselves and their families and make payments on fines and costs is such a critical component to moving forward with a successful life. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks very much, Mark. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Can you tell us about TriStarr? What does your company do and how does it work?
Sure. TriStarr is a staffing and recruiting agency based in Lancaster, serving South Central Pennsylvania. We provide temporary staffing. We provide recruiting services and consulting services to some of our clients. So our specialty is in office clerical and admin staffing. So think about receptionists, admin assistants, customer service folks, bookkeepers, those types of jobs are where our focus is.
Doesn't one aspect of your company also deal with more like the trades, more sort of blue-collar work?
We don't do that type of work.
Okay.
There's a couple of companies we refer out when we get folks like that. I have a pretty good pulse of that market.
Okay.
So I can certainly talk to that.
So can you talk about how criminal records and people that have them, how do they affect you, your business, and how prospective employees approach, the companies that think about employing them?
Sure. If I go back to when we started the business in the early 90s, there was no internet. So in order to perform a criminal background check took a long time. It wasn't as easy and it wasn't as focused upon by employers at that time. As the internet made information more available, we started to see clients requiring more background checks, and it was easier to do them. And because of that, more and more clients started to add them to their pre-screening process. There are certain clients who have a bona fide reason to ask for a criminal check. What we have seen, though, is some clients just adding them haphazardly when they aren't always required. So the difficulty we run into often is a client requiring a criminal background check and having candidates that might have something on their record, but it just doesn't match up to what. There's really no reason for that in that job, and there's an education piece that we have to provide both to the client and the candidate about that. So it's really made our jobs a little bit more difficult in having to provide more education when someone's got something on their background.
And this is sort of a side question, but have you noticed that either your employers or various HR departments, do they ever have questions or completely understand the gradings of offenses and which crimes are which?
No, I don't. I have to go back to our cheat sheet and look what this is versus that and levels and misdemeanors. And, it's very complex. So my team of recruiters have literally cheat sheets so they can see what does this mean versus what does that mean. And I would say our clients probably don't.
Wow.
Not all of them. Certainly some of them do.
I'd love to see one of those cheat sheets.
It was provided by the company that does the background services for us. So.
Okay. Have you seen changes in how employers are willing to consider versus not consider people that have records? I guess I'm thinking as we went into COVID and the employment crisis and certain issues, have they been sort of becoming more lenient and tolerant, or is it all sort of specifically job related?
Definitely the pendulum is swinging back toward more leniency. Pre-COVID and a few years before that, lots of requests for it almost was becoming a standard thing that clients were asking for. It was just part of their screening process. Then there's COVID, and coming out of COVID, especially in this market where candidate availability is so tight, we started to see more clients willing to start to have a conversation and realize, I need people. I've got to start looking at my screening process to make sure I'm not screening out people that can do this job, and really whatever offense they had just doesn't matter
Right.
in that sense. So I think you're seeing that pendulum swing back a little bit.
I've seen it and sort of felt like both HR departments as well as employment companies are just more willing to at least do an interview and see what the actual problem is.
Quick question. Could you elaborate? Like, do you know, or do you have a sense of what type of jobs some of those conversations are happening in? Just to kind of give us an idea of what specific things may be changing or opening up to people.
Right. I think the initial area that's opening up into is what in our world we call light industrial business. So it's low, no skill positions, think warehouse work, those types of things, pick pack, where there's a pretty strong need for folks and a lot of competition for those folks. And in the past, where a company might say, well, this is my background check process, I have to do it for everybody, their HR departments are starting to get the advice that, you know what, you can carve this group out differently than you're looking at another group. You know, what you look for in an accounting department can be different than what you look for in your pick packers on the line. So that's where
great.
we're starting to see it most.
Great.
And this is off topic too,
Sure.
but it seems like in general, just from generic advertising or whatever, that not only those kinds of positions, but many other entry-level positions are having a higher hourly wage paid than certainly 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Is that correct?
Absolutely. We're in 23 now. In 2021, we were seeing pay rates rise 15 to 20% year over year. 2022, that slowed down a tad. We were still around 8 to 12% year over year increases. And I think, and a lot of economists that I speak to say that was kind of catch up from the 2008 recession till COVID. That wage pressure has started to slow, but you're looking at entry-level folks making $22, $23, $24, $5 an hour. So that kind of pulls everybody up in the pay rate.
It wanted me to be a young man again in my teens and get my first job instead of
really. I think mine was $6 an hour. Or something.
So then again, back to maybe an entry-level job or many other job, what are the most important characteristics for a candidate to have when they're coming in to interview or to talk to your agency?
In those entry-level positions, what we're looking for, and I'll use kind of all entry-level, not so much. In our world, we're looking for computer experience, that type of stuff. Other entry-level positions, for the most part these days, HR folks are looking for people that are going to show up on time, be reliable, and work long enough that they can grow within the company. The biggest problem that me and my peers have in those entry-level folks is they work for a few days and disappear. So come in and show up every day, and you're probably going to be on a good track.
So I can understand that. And that also has to be part of your concern when you're interviewing candidates. So is there any way when somebody says, no, I'll show up, I'll be there every day, is there any way to just get some kind of sense of whether they mean it or not? Or are you constantly surprised, like, I thought he was a good one?
Well, we're not as surprised as maybe someone who doesn't do it as often, but there's questions we ask that, we dig into their work history. We look at how long they've been at a position. We call the references, those types of things. And the other thing we're looking at is just how honest they are in the interview. If someone has a real jumpy resume is the technical term we use in the business, where they've only worked a few months here, a few months there, a few months here. If they're honest about that, that would lead us to think, okay, the reasons they give match with what we heard when we did the reference check. Maybe this person is going to start showing up in a morning,
right.
or maybe there were reasons for them not showing up that were legitimate. Certainly through COVID, people were bouncing around big time, especially in the people could move for significant dollars. Pre-COVID, people would in the entry-level world would move for 25, 50 cents an hour. It's real
Right.
money. Now, when they can move for dollars an hour, they're certainly going to take advantage of that when they can. So it's just part of the interview process, digging into their backgrounds and gauging the honesty in the interview. Do they show up for the interview on time? Do they cancel do they cancel 3 interviews and every reason's different? That starts to lead us to believe, okay, I don't know if this person's going to be the most reliable on the job.
So the reason I'm thinking about this, and maybe you'd consider like writing a blog article or something for recorderacer.net, is because I know employment's critical. I know a lot of my candidates struggling with records need to find employment to candidly pay for the service, to clear their record, to make them even more employable. But at the same time, I want to help sort of groom them or train them as to what is expected, because I don't want to put up a link to TriStarr or something and then just find a whole bunch of people saying, hey, this will be just somewhere, I saw them on the YouTube, so now I'm just going to apply and then not show up. That doesn't benefit anybody.
No, it doesn't. Really, if they just show up in entry-level positions, whether it's a pick packer or a customer service rep, that's half the battle, because companies are investing in the training. We have several clients where there's weeks of training before they actually start the job. If they miss days during that training, they're behind. Or they can't even start because they don't know specific things, because those trainings are, they're happening sometimes 2 times a month. So just get them there, be vested in learning that position, and it can be something that you can really grow into. We have lots of stories of temp employees who started in an entry-level job and worked their way up.
Well, sure. That's the flip side, is that if you really do want to earn your way back, and if you really do want the opportunity, it's never been as wide open as it is now, as if you can show up at the right time, respectful and diligent, and just keep showing up. It seems like you will always just be ushered through the system, because the companies need good, reliable people.
Sure. Absolutely.
So another question I had was, do you have any advice for people searching for jobs when they have a record of some sort? But we sort of covered that.
There's one thing I like to add here. When you're going through the interview process, be honest. We have positions with clients that require a spotless record, and we have others that the client doesn't need to do a criminal background check. When we're interviewing candidates, we might not always be thinking of them just for one specific position. We might be looking at them for whatever positions we might have. The candidate that comes in and says, I made this mistake X years ago. Here's what I've done to correct it. I'm looking for that second chance. We might have some place to put them that where that offense doesn't matter for that client. Yeah. There's certainly probably some that we couldn't send them to. The candidates that are honest with us, they tell us what they did, they tell us when they did it, they tell us what the offense is. We do our checks and it all jives. Okay, we've got an honest person here. I can't tell you how many times we interview someone and we tell them we're going to run a background check, and they say, "Oh, it's clean," and it doesn't come back clean. That's set the criminal offense aside. They're just not being honest in the interview, so now I have to question everything they said. That honesty goes a long way in the interview process.
Be honest.
Yeah.
One other thought, though. I think, Mark, you've talked about this on a couple of occasions. There's kind of 2 different types of stories to tell when you are conveying what has happened in your past. There's the facts, and then there's here's how I was in a bad situation, and, basically just kind of telling, for lack of a better term, your sob story, just to, whether it's, intentional or just sort of subconsciously trying to manipulate the situation. I think the facts-based one is the one, even from your perspective. There's the perspective of when you're dealing with Mark's line of work, but when you're dealing with an interview, it seems like, you want to hear the facts, right?
Just, yeah, for the most part. But if there is a story there, I would honestly, remain honest. If, for example, you were in a bad situation and we've seen women who've been in an abusive relationship and they have to get out of it and they don't have any money and they shoplift. Tell us the facts. You shoplifted. Tell us more why you did that. And the recruiter, if everything else in the interview is lining up, can say, here's someone who needs a break. And that shoplifting that shoplifting offense that was 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago really doesn't have any relation to the job that they're going to do. That's going to lead that recruiter to say, I can give this person a shot, should they have all the rest of the, of course,
that's really good.
Skills and everything to do the job. So it's a balance, but it all comes back to honesty, because we're going to check, and every company's going to check, and it's easy to check these days. It used to cost money to check. Now it doesn't cost much money at all to check, because those records are all available.
Great. That's cool. Thank you.
Scott, here's something that I run into as a lawyer dealing with sort of the opposite side of going to court with people for decades. But lawyers are sort of like bean counters. So if I'm going to court with a client and he wants to get out of jail, in my mind, I could almost summarize, this was a burglary, a felony of the second degree. You've received a plea bargain for it to be taken down to a criminal trespass. You're going to get a year probation, pay $100 fine and court costs. Do you get it? Yeah. You're ready to go through the plea? Yes. That is what happened, okay? Then, this is the odd part. From the moment they go on probation, they meet a probation and parole officer, they're told to get employment. Many of them are never given a copy of what they pled to, what's on their record. They don't know how to find it. And then sometimes I suspect they're at a job interview and they're talking to somebody and they're asked, is there anything on your record? Now the answer is, I have a misdemeanor criminal trespass that I got a year probation for. But with all those details sort of being a jumble, so many times they just go into the story. Well, I was in this house. It's like, no, that's a felony burglary. No, I was charged. I pled guilty to criminal trespass for being in a house when I shouldn't have been there. I got a year probation. That was 4 years ago. And so that is one of the reasons why, actually, for Record Eraser, if people give me their first name, last name, date of birth, we'll research their record to see what's on the public UJS portal. We'll tell them what can be cleared and when, as well as give them a copy of it so that if they go to interview TriStarr or an employer or anybody, they can say, yes, I do have a record. Here it is. I'm being accurate. And it just takes sort of that vague ambiguity out of it that can really spin badly.
Yeah, and that goes back to the honesty piece. The interviewer may look at that and say that's dishonest, and it really isn't.
Right.
But just for lack of a better word, ignorance there, that they don't understand what they pled to. They don't have a copy of it. I would have their ducks in the row. If they've had a good relationship with their probation officer, list that probation officer as a reference. They know that person's history better than anybody, and they're probably going to be honest and tell us, yeah, that guy or that woman's been here. They've stuck to the program. They've been clean. This one's worth a shot, because that's their reputation on the line at that point. So don't fear them. If you've done a felony, if you killed somebody or you murdered someone or robbed, a felony robbery, that's a lot tougher to get around.
Sure.
It's those misdemeanors that I think more people are afraid of than they need to be.
I think they're scared to reveal something because it's in the fog. They know they did something. For instance, retail theft starts off as a summary for the first offense, usually a misdemeanor for the second. The third one's a felony. You're still getting probation. You're still paying fines and costs. But I could see somebody sitting there and saying, well, I had a couple of retail thefts, and then being confronted with like, well, you have a felony. No, I don't. I just have retail theft. Well, So you really need to know what's
Yeah,
on your record.
you need to know what's on your record. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's the key, because any employer is going to check if it's part of their background process.
Right. That's really interesting. Trying to think of if I had any other questions to go over with you. I would love to publish a blog post or something
Yeah,
about
we can do
things.
something like that. Just trying to think of some other thoughts.
Yeah, well, the prompt to give a prompt here, other than the honesty portion, is there any other advice you could give to people who are applying for jobs that, you know, is maybe in the initial screening process or the initial, you know, I know background checks don't always happen until, you know, maybe further down the line in your world.
Right.
What about stuff that they can do kind of just in the very beginning that could help set them up for success?
Sure. Be as prepared for your interview as you can, and help that recruiter or HR professional, help them do their job. Come in with a fresh, clean resume that's accurate. Bring your reference list. Understand the job you're applying for and understand how your experience relates to that. And then I would say bring that copy of the record with you, because they might not check till the end of the process when an offer comes, because that's what the lawyers, you know, that's their advice. Wait till you make an offer to do those checks. But for if you've got that a record and it does pertain to that job, and that recruiter takes you all the way to the end and then has to rescind an offer, nobody wins, right? I always tell people, own up to what you've done. There are plenty of jobs out there for people that have some type of record. Target those. There's companies that love to give opportunities for people coming out of the system, and I've found really, really good employees, and there are good ones. Get through that interview process honestly and make it as easy as you can for the HR person, because they're busy. We're in an environment of less than 3% unemployment. There's not a lot of qualified candidates out there to begin with. So there are places for folks to go. Just do your research. Just don't blindly apply to things and think you're going to get a job. It's not going to happen.
What about that initial application? How much do you want to say on the paperwork portion before you even talk to your recruiter?
Answer the questions honestly. Most applications will only ask if you've got a felony. If you've got a felony, say you do. Because if you don't, then you lied on your application and forget that you have a felony, you're not going to get that job. If you have one, put one there. If you have a misdemeanor offense, you don't have a felony. So you don't check that box. You're being honest.
Yeah.
When you get into the interview, I would encourage folks to say, you know, the box said felony. I just want you to make you aware, have a misdemeanor. Here's what it is. Immediately, that HR person, that person doing the interview is going to take a step back and say, I've got someone that's honest here.
But you don't want to go in the first big text box that you can find, kind of pour out your whole story. Just enter the information that's available.
Answer the questions honestly on the application. So,
Great.
Because think of an application and even a resume, the goal of that is to get an interview where you can tell your story.
That's great advice.
That's where you tell the story.
Great advice.
Not only that, but honesty is such a basic component of every interaction that if people can't give a sense of honesty and be honest even about their shortcomings, who wants to employ them?
Right.
Because they'll say they show up and they won't. They'll say this and that, and then so anyway.
Well, then you've got the lawyers on the other side, Mark, that are going to come to, if I hire that person who was dishonest, they're going to say, you knew they were dishonest, now we're going to sue you. So, you know,
Right.
the employer's got some culpability there too.
Right.
Yeah.
So if people are interested in using your services, how do they find you?
They find us just, these days it's easy, TriStarRjobs.com. Hit our website, you'll see all of the jobs we have open and all of the services we provide. And if you qualify for those jobs, certainly put in an application. Like I said, we have some clients that have very strict background requirements on one side, and the other side is those that don't.
And if anybody wants to know their record before they interview or apply for a job, you can get that for free at recorderacer.net.
Good.
Thanks,
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Look forward to working with you.
Sure, me too.
This is April 4th. I wanted to just give a couple of notes about a recent CLE that I sat in on that had to do with pardons, the pardon process in Pennsylvania and the pardon projects around the state. There are not a whole lot of updates about the board, although actually the lieutenant governor and the secretary actually were on the CLE training. CLE stands for Computer Legal Education Training that lawyers go through to stay up on their practices and procedures. So Secretary Shelley Watson was present, as well as Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is that the board acknowledged that there's currently a backlog of 1,700 cases, which in one way sort of seems like a lot. The pardon process is usually about 2 years, and more people, I think, are asking for pardons. So on one hand, 1,700 sounded like a lot, but then again, given the need, 1,700 didn't sound like that many. And so I was encouraged to see that the board is implementing processes and procedures. They talked about doubling their staff, and we know that they're also becoming more digitized and still looking forward to moving things online, although that isn't actually on the calendar yet. It's something they're constantly working on. There was a merit review of hundreds of applications coming up for actually this week. Now, the merit review sessions are not public, but there will be hundreds of applications in the pipeline that the board will be reviewing. And then theoretically in May 17th and 18th, are the public presentations where those people who have received at least 2 thumbs up from the merit reviews will be invited to do 5 or 10-minute Zoom interviews with the board. And as you all know, after the public presentation is when, if you get 3 or more votes, it actually goes to Governor Josh Shapiro to see if he will issue a pardon. And so it looks like it's going to be an exciting year. Also, there's been recent legislation that became enacted that gave common pleas judges the ability to waive fines and costs. And so this is actually a law. You might think that the common pleas judges have always been able to waive fines and costs, and maybe they have. Occasionally it's happened. Common pleas judges have an enormous amount of power, and a well-written motion occasionally gets relief. But now it's a law that they are, in fact, authorized and entitled to remit fines and costs. I think one of the places this is going to play a big part is years ago when people were caught delivering drugs, felony drug offenses, they could be hit with a $50,000 or $100,000 fine, a mandatory fine, not because there was a victim that was hurt, not because of anything. It's just because you dealt fentanyl, you dealt marijuana, here's a $50,000 fine, which you can imagine would take anybody years to pay off if it could actually be paid off at all. And I'm looking forward to trying to get a county court judge to acknowledge that that mandatory fine, which was also written under the Mandatory Sentencing Act, which has since been found unconstitutional, that they might be receptive to receiving some motions to write off these excessive fines and costs, because as you may know, if the restitution and fines and costs are taken care of, then you're a better candidate for a pardon. Okay, filing for a pardon should wait until you have fines and costs taken care of, or at least on a repayment plan. So that's the update from or about the Board of Pardons for April. Now comes the time when I share some stories of the type that came into the website of criminal convictions that are causing problems for people that have made mistakes in the past. I usually do this when the mistakes are sort of typical. They're the kind I will read several times during the day or the week. Most crimes, as everybody knows, are not murder or aggravated assault or the nasty 9 felonies. They are simply people having very tough situations and occasionally reacting badly. In this case, someone was convicted of a misdemeanor of the first degree for making terroristic threats. So it was apparently a child custody case, and you can imagine a couple separating and filing custody papers, and one parent being seen as trying to take a child away from the other parent. That's not going to go over well with the mother or the father, and it goes either way. The way the terroristic threat statute is written is very vague. A terroristic threat is when you threaten to commit a crime of violence. And so the police interpret this as any kind of threat whatsoever. And nobody wants to go to trial on a terroristic threat. Terroristic threats is always a misdemeanor of the first degree. But when you get into the details, you usually get a story like, yeah, my wife was threatening to take my baby away from me, and I said, don't do that, it'll kill me. But you mentioned the word kill in the same sentence as taking the child away. And what the wife heard was, don't take my baby away, I'll kill you. And there's your terroristic threat. If it went to a jury trial, I don't know if you would be convicted, but in the heat of the moment, too many lawyers running around. You got family law lawyers, now you have a criminal defense lawyer. You still haven't settled out the custody. Usually the guy's going to take the plea, ends up with probation, restitution, fines, and costs. And I would say if that charge has a reasonable explanation and is at least 5 to 10 years old, it would be a reasonable candidate to file a pardon on. Or the ever popular possession with intent to deliver and theft. 5 years ago. I've been sober since then. Young person with 2 children, want to improve their living condition. My record has taken away my right to have several apartments and several career opportunities. So now you have a mother with children trying to improve her life, and she can't because of something. Over 5 years old. And remember, the pardon process is 2 years. So it's going to be 7 years old by the time they review it. Just think of the economics here, though. If you take somebody on decreased earnings, earning what, $5,000, $10,000 less a year than they could, times 5 to 7 years, you're between $50,000 and $100,000 of economic damage for somebody. This situation came up in our podcast with Scott. Receiving stolen property. I was not informed that I was pleading guilty to a felony. Had I known, I wouldn't have pled guilty. Now I can't find employment. Classic. Frequently.
Can you tag on to the end of that one? Just like run through what they should do.
Oh. Yeah. So, the fact that he didn't think it was a felony. Well, it's receiving stolen property. So here's what many people don't understand. Theft charges, which is receiving stolen property, and theft, they're all graded the same. It's based on the value of what was stolen. So small thefts of value are misdemeanors. They grow to be misdemeanor ones. By the time what you take is over $2,000, it's a felony 3. If it's over $20,000, I think, it's a felony 2. If it's under $20,000, it's still a misdemeanor of the first degree. But you would most likely get probation for all of this. And so when the person goes to court and they're told it's a receiving, you're going to get probation. Well, they're just focused on probation, okay, receiving, fine. They're not thinking, was it a felony or is it an M? Is it an M or an F? And so they eat the plea, they do the probation. At some point, they see a piece of paper that says it's a felony, and now they have to explain it. So thefts are not crimes of the century, and if there is a theft charge that is several years old and it was nonviolent, and in this particular case of this particular person, there's some mention to the fact that it occurred when they were dealing with drug and alcohol issues, the board is always going to want to know that you're strong in your recovery and that there's no chance you're going to relapse or that you're going to go back to a life of crime. So it's important to know that if drugs and alcohol are the reason for criminal conduct, that you get good and strong in your recovery and stay on track for 5 to 10 years. And I think you'll be a good candidate to get that reviewed. Obviously, we can't guarantee a result, but a good candidate to get that reviewed to see if the votes are given. If you don't get the votes you need, the rules say you have to wait a year, and then you can ask again. And finally, here's a felony. I was arrested over 10 years ago for a robbery. And that was over 10 years ago. He wanted to actually work in law enforcement, and he's not able to get a job in law enforcement. The robbery occurred because somebody took something away from him, and he asked for it back. They denied and walked away. I went up, presented a weapon, and took my item back. Well, robbery is the taking of something from another person by force. The force can either be actual, as in I stab you, or it can be implicit, as in things aren't going to go well. With my pocket knife here, if you don't give me my thing back, nobody's hurt, nobody's cut, but that's going to be a felony robbery. I always look at the amount of time that was spent, because if somebody did jail, it's a good indication that the prosecuting attorney thought this was a more serious variety of what they have seen. And so a low-level robbery would frequently be pled down to a simple assault misdemeanor and a theft. A higher-end robbery is one where you're going to see somebody doing 1 to 2 years in state prison, followed by a period of parole. And that's going to be an indication that it was a felony, pretty serious. Should probably be closer to 10 years or older, with law-abiding history for 10 years. And then I think that would probably make an okay candidate as well. I think that's it for the updates. April 4th, 2023. Let's go out there and get employment and clear records. Thank you.